Hey everybody, welcome back to another checkpoint on campus. I am your host, Norris Howard, as always, and we are the voice of collegiate esports. I am joined, as always, by Jacob Brothers, my co-host. What's going on, Jacob?
Not much. I'm just having a good old day and some good old weather. How about you?
You know, it is beautiful here in sunny Detroit, but we got a little Overwatch to talk about, so let's hop right on into it. The seeding mixer happened over the weekend. Now, Jacob, you let me know before we started the show this afternoon that the seeding mixer was supposed to mean one thing. Mm-hmm. It then was told to everybody to mean something else, and then eventually it came out that it meant exactly what we thought it was.
That's correct. So actually, the seeding mixer was last week, and this week was the Varsity Wildcard.
Yes, excuse me. Yes, You're right. This week was
not to be confused with all these different definitions. But yeah, so the seeding mixer initially was like, hey, all teams are going to play. It's like, okay. And then during broadcast, it was like, okay, these are the teams that are playing for one spot. It's like, okay. And then I tune in to, look at the Varsity Wildcard, and I go on to Google, and then there's a little Wikipedia of, here are all the teams who had played that week that we didn't talk about. It's like, oh. So we're going to do a little recap of both briefly. So Northwood did not play in the mixer, which is interesting. So I assume since they were the top slot,
they're probably
they just got the one seed. Yeah. And so since we don't know the official seed values, we just know who lost in what round. I kind of grouped them into tiers. So in group one, Maryville came out on top, which is interesting. We have some storylines about that. And then second was Bellevue. So interesting that a school who hasn't been in this conversation before is now having the second seed, per se, of that group. And then the third tier would be HU Storm and Ohio State. And the fourth tier would be Akron, UCI, Midland, and Florida.
And outside of Bellevue and Midland, these are all teams that we have seen in the mix before, especially Maryville, HU Storm, and Ohio State. Ohio State popped onto the scene this semester, really started to prove that they were one of the top tier programs in the country for Overwatch. They were able to take down defending champions Utah. They looked very good at the start of this semester. And speaking of Utah, they have dropped down into your second grouping. What's going on with Utah right now?
That's a great question because they did win that group. So Utah did beat everyone in that group, but they didn't really play any of the good people. And then second place was Boise State, which is interesting.
All right.
So maybe they'll make some noise. The third tier was UT Dallas and North Texas. And then the fourth tier was Northeastern, University of Minnesota, Ontario Tech, University of Illinois. And the final tier of that grouping would be CSULB, UC Riverside, Washington, CU Boulder. It's unfortunate Washington's that low. Stevens Institute of Technology, and SCAD University. So again, kind of where you would expect these teams to lay. If I went back to my predictions, this is kind of right. No mean to brag. And then from group three, Mizzou was again, the only team to make it to that. So of the main competitors before the wild card, that's who we got. And kind of the storylines from that is that Maryville is back in the game. They weren't in the game the whole regular season, and then they're in this seeding mixer where they beat UCI and Harrisburg. Harrisburg being the bigger thing there, because Harrisburg's supposed to be, the best team. And this newish Maryville roster was still better.
And one thing that I have been pulling from all of this stuff is that, the UT Dallas, man, we talk about them so much when it comes to their Overwatch team in terms of when will they step up? When will they be amongst the elite programs? And they continue to flounder. Yes, they beat Washington, but they dropped to Boise State, a team that chronically underperforms. And yet, Doc Haskell got them together enough for them to beat UT Dallas this time. And so, I'm still concerned about them. And Utah, I'm very, very concerned about, considering they're the defending champions. And yet, they have, not necessarily proven themselves against some of the top tier programs. So even though the seeding mixer went down and we saw a lot of the teams that we expect to perform well there's still a couple of those bubble teams. And it's crazy to talk about a defending champion as a bubble team. But at this point, Utah, UT Dallas, those are bubble teams now. So the seeding mixer ended up, in my opinion, really proving that, as you said, not just your predictions were correct, but the overall lay of the land did not change very much. But we did have a few like Bellevue who were able to get in there and really start making the name for themselves. So let's head over to the wild card results and talk a little bit about what happened in the wild card games.
Yeah, so the wild card was the top 7 teams went on, basically. And we do have to talk about the broadcast at some point here because there were 2 days of matches. That's 8 matches total, right? And we saw 3 of the 7 teams who made it. That's not good.
Not great.
And on day 2, UCD was in 3 of the 4 matches. And that's because they were in the knockout bracket. But, you have to think, because, let's just run through the top 1 through 7 so we can complain properly. So, going from top to bottom, Miami University Redhawks, Illinois State, George Mason University, University of Michigan, interesting. UCLA, Fresno State, and UCSD. So, UCSD did get in through the wild card when they weren't able to in the seeding mixer. So, we did not see Miami or Illinois. The top two. Now, there's a little tournament called March Madness. It's a little popular, and people organize that event, right? They organize it based off of teams who are going to do well. Granted, all the games are televised, but they organize about what teams are going to do well.
Right.
If someone came up to me organizing this and said, "Who should we watch on these teams?" I'd say, I don't know, Miami University. I don't know, Miami of Ohio has kind of done well in Overwatch. Maybe you should watch them. And then you don't do that.
Yeah. It's
whack.
A bit frustrating, and a part of me can't help but feel, and I'm sure this is not an actual reality, but a part of me says it is really hard for me to not feel like there's a little bit of West Coast bias here, because we do know that esports, West Coast is very big. The California schools, people want the California school. Guess what? California schools haven't beaten anybody, okay? They don't win things, okay? The winners have consistently come from the East Coast and the Midwest. So why would you not be giving the premier slots to the teams that are big and are winning? So what this lets me know, or at least what this lets me feel like, is that there are people programming the streams who don't actually know which teams are good or not. And that is a little frustrating. Now, don't get me wrong, to take nothing away from UCSD or anybody really involved in the wild card. But you want everybody to get a chance at playing on the big stage. You want everybody to get a shot.
Especially the good teams.
Not even just, you want everybody.
Right.
But the point is that when you got teams that are performing well, you got to make sure people know that they're performing well. Because right now, as far as anybody concerned, UCSD is the best team in the wild card.
As a viewer, you don't even know about Maryville.
You don't even know. So, you got to make sure. So now when we get to the national bracket, people are going to see UCSD or maybe UCLA or Michigan or one of these teams get absolutely washed by Northwood, a school that most people outside of esports probably had never heard of in their entire lives. It's going to be some cognitive dissonance there. It's going to be a little wonky for some people. And so I implore Activision Blizzard, I implore the folks in charge of the broadcast to just look at who's actually playing well and maybe say, you know what, let's make sure, hey, have we shown Illinois State on any of the broadcasts recently? No? All right, cool. Maybe we need to show one of their games. Have we shown George Mason? Because George Mason is a school that I don't think I've seen play all but once.
Yep, they played UCSD, and that's the only game we saw.
Over the entire wild card. So to me, the way I look at it is that, wow, so George Mason is whatever, because we only saw them once. I understand that they have limited streams, they have limited time, but they shouldn't. It's a digital product.
You can talk to people ahead of time. You can plan this weeks in advance.
Yeah, it's just something to me that I'm sad that we continue to see. But we do have the teams that have made it. Again, the only really surprising one, in my opinion, is University of Michigan. Everybody else has been a very, very, staunch esports school or Overwatch team in particular. University of Michigan is really only in the past year or so become a varsity or not a varsity program, but a recognized club program. And I think this is really interesting to see University of Michigan. Again, we're talking about a Big Ten school. We're not seeing a lot of Big Ten schools completely come in and run it. Illinois is one of the only other ones. So we're starting to see Purdue and Michigan and Illinois and a few of these Big Ten schools, Power 5 conference schools, really start to get involved. And if they keep performing, who knows? But Miami and Illinois, I mean, they're on a whole nother level out of these teams.
Yeah, I agree. And you could even look at the old like Ohio and Michigan rivalry. Like, Michigan's not even there yet. Like, Ohio played good teams. Michigan, the only team they beat was UCLA. Well, of like playoff caliber. And it's not really hard to beat UCLA. The only other thing that I really got, because I agree, Miami and Illinois are the only two teams that are probably going to make a splash of this grouping because they stomped all the competition, didn't drop a map until the final. What I saw about UCSD, hand up, I was a little hot on them. I think I was a little too hot on them because they have that Ohio State tenacity, but without the carry. And that's going to lead you to losing games. Their positioning is sometimes great, sometimes it's awful, sometimes players pop off, sometimes they don't. And when you have that layer of inconsistency, you're not going to win games. Now, they have the grit, obviously, to come back. They played 3 different games that day, but you don't have your carry with that kind of a comp.
Yeah, and the thing with Ohio State, their main carry, their main hit scan carry performance, absolutely awesome player. But it has been proven that when they go up against some of the higher caliber teams, that if you can sort of freeze out performance or you can isolate them from the rest of the team, Ohio State can be vulnerable. So when they go against the Northwoods and the Maryvilles and the Harrisburgs of the world, it'll be interesting to see how they perform in a playoff setting. We'll be watching Ohio State very closely, as well as the rest of these teams as the playoffs will be getting underway this weekend, starting on Saturday. So, Jacob, knowing that the playoffs are coming, pick to me 4 teams. If you could pick the semifinals right now, bracket be damned, who makes it? Pick the 4 teams who move on.
Well, that would definitely be Maryville, HU Storm, Northwood. Those are locks for sure. And then maybe Utah. Maybe now when the stakes are for real, because that same Utah team's still there. Cool ABC still great. Dog 21 still great. Like, they could definitely make the semis still, or the quarters.
All right, so you heard it from the Galaxy Brain himself. We will see if those predictions come to pass. Thank you very much, Jacob, for an awesome breakdown of the wild card and the seeding mixer of the Overwatch Collegiate Championship. We will be watching the playoffs very closely starting this weekend. The streams will go on at noon Eastern, noon Pacific. Noon Pacific. And so make sure you guys tune in for that. It'll be on the Contenders YouTube. I know a lot of folks have been asking about where do we watch that. All of the collegiate stuff for Overwatch is on the Overwatch Contenders YouTube. So make sure you guys check it out there.